So for this video, I'm going to be discussing Stephen King's newest release, You Like It Darker, which is his brand new short story collection that just came out a few days ago. And just right off the bat, I loved this collection. I'm not going to be giving it the 5-star treatment, but like I said, I really love this collection. I'm going to go ahead and give it 4.5 stars. I will say all of these stories are at least good. They're pretty good. There's no bad ones in this collection, and a lot of them are really good, and some of them are even some of my new all-time favorite Stephen King stories. Very good collection. I was so glad that this was a really good book because some of his recent books have not been up to par with some of his other stuff that he's done in the past. So I'm really glad to get a really solid book and collection from him. And yeah, you like it darker. I gave 4.5 stars. And for this video, I will be doing a ranking of the stories that are in here, starting from the bottom, my least favorites, which are still pretty good, all the way up to my number one favorite story in the collection. So that's what this video is going to be. Very excited to talk about new Stephen King with y'all. And enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So there are 12 stories. Some of them are short stories. Some of them are novella length to rank in here. So 12 stories. So starting at the number 12 spot, we have Red Screen. And again, none of the stories in here are bad, but this is coming in at the last one because it's definitely the shortest in the collection, and I wish it were a bit longer, which is kind of ironic because with a lot of his short story collections that he's done, especially something like Nightmares and Dreamscapes, my main complaint was that these short stories are too long. But for this one, I just wanted like a bit more meat on the bone. The audiobook version was only like 20 minutes, so it probably couldn't have been more than like 10 pages. So I really don't want to give too much away, but basically, yeah, I really don't want to give too much away, but really I just wanted more from this story. Basically, it starts out with a guy being interrogated for killing his wife, and the reasoning for him killing his wife is pretty interesting, but again, I just wish it would have been more fleshed out, and the ending was a bit predictable. It was still a solid story, and again, none of the stories in here are bad, but definitely this comes in at my least favorite. So Red Screen at number 12. And then for the number 11 spot, we have the story Finn, which I actually had previously listened to either last year or a couple of years ago. This was a Scribd exclusive when they were still called Scribd. It was a Scribd exclusive audiobook you could listen to. It was about an hour long, and I listened to it, and I enjoyed it at the time. And I went ahead and, of course, re-listened to it for the audiobook that I got on Audible. And it was still pretty good, but probably it diminishes in value a little bit just because I already knew what was going to happen. It's still a fun story, but overall, I had already listened to it, so the excitement factor really wasn't there for me. It's still pretty good. It's basically about a guy who always seems to have bad luck. Like he was like struck by lightning at one point, and just crazy stuff happens in his life. And then all of a sudden he gets kidnapped, and they're trying to ask for this one guy, but he keeps saying like, that's not me, I'm this person. And the people that have kidnapped him are pretty crazy. So it's a pretty fun story. But it comes in at number 11 just because really I already knew what was going to happen. So Finn at number 11. And now we're cracking into the top 10 here, folks, which isn't saying much because there's only 12 stories, but oh well. For number 10, we have The Dreamers. And this story involves kind of like a mad scientist who's really into trying to figure out what dreams are all about and what dreams mean to like the universe as a whole. And it had some pretty cool and interesting stuff. I really liked more kind of like the sci-fi elements of like the scientist like explaining why he thinks dreams are very important and why he thinks his research is like needed for society. I really liked that aspect. It kind of went off the rails a little bit. Of course, Stephen King does that sometimes. Again, another story that I wish would have been maybe fleshed out a bit more. It was good for what it was, but for now, it's number 10. Like I said, it had a really cool concept because I do really enjoy kind of like dream stuff and like what dreams could maybe represent. But like I said, this one was a bit nutty, which sometimes is good, sometimes it's bad. It was decent here. So for now, number 10 is The Dreamers. And for number 9 on the list, we have Willie the Weirdo. And this one's pretty interesting. It has kind of a younger character who is kind of obsessed a little bit with like talking with his grandpa. And Stephen King is usually very good at having like a younger protagonist befriending an older protagonist. And this one was a little weird because he keeps wanting Grandpa to like tell him stories, and it almost seems like as if Grandpa has led like multiple lives and he's kind of remembering past lives because he's always asking about like, oh, like tell me that story about like the Civil War, or tell me that story with Cleopatra. So you're kind of getting a vague idea of like, is Grandpa like just making up stories, or like was he actually there? So that aspect was pretty cool. The ending was somewhat ambiguous, but I kind of get where he's going with it. But yeah, I overall enjoyed this one. Not one of my favorites in the collection, but a pretty cool short story. So yeah, Willie the Weirdo comes in at number 9 on the list. And coming in at number 8 on the list, we have The Turbulence Expert. Another short story that was pretty short and I wish would have been fleshed out a bit more. It has a really cool concept. It's about this guy who goes on to airplanes because he's with this kind of like secret company, I guess, who sends people out on airplanes that are probably gonna crash, but like just because like this person is on the airplane, they're not gonna crash. He's a turbulent expert, and what that entails, you can read it and find out. But I thought the concept was really cool, and the ending went in a direction that I thought was pretty cool. But I wish, like, I want to know more about these turbulence experts. It was very short, very brief. I really liked it for what it was, but I think it would have been cool, maybe even as a novella. But Stephen King is usually pretty good about deciding like the length of stories. For this one, I wish it was a bit longer, honestly. But yeah, really cool concept. I really liked it, and it comes in at number 8 on the list, The Turbulence Expert. And starting with number 7, like these are the stories that I thought were really, really good. So like these stories were all really good. So number 7, we have Rattlesnakes, which if you don't know is actually supposed to be a sequel to Cujo. So if you have not read Cujo, it spoils the crap out of that book. So before you read that, make sure you have read Cujo before you read Rattlesnakes. But yes, this was definitely a sequel to Cujo, if you didn't know. It takes place many, many years after the events of that. And I don't want to necessarily say who the protagonist is because spoilers. But yeah, you get this person like years and years later after the events of Cujo, and they're dealing with another weird thing that's happening to them. May and may not involve snakes. It does. But yeah, I really like this one. It went into a direction that I wasn't really anticipating, but I really ended up enjoying it. Yeah, again, this one's kind of hard to talk about because it spoils Cujo, and I don't want to give specific details necessarily, but it was very creepy, and I really did enjoy it. So Rattlesnakes at number 7 on the list. And for number 6, we have the short story Lori, and this was a fun story. It involves a sister basically not blackmailing, but basically almost forcing her brother to adopt this puppy that she has. That she's basically like, oh well, if you don't adopt him, I'm going to take him to the SPCA and they're just going to kill him. So you might as well take him. And he's like, I'll take him for a little bit and try to find a new home for him. And it's a fun story, and I can't really say without spoiling too much about what happens in the end, but it gets pretty tense at the end, and I really liked it. And I will say, minor spoiler warning for this story. It does have animal cruelty, I guess, not for the dog, but there is another animal that gets involved that does perish. So if you know, be aware of that. But yeah, this story was very good, very tense in the end. Overall, I really enjoyed it. So Lori comes in at number 6 on the list. And number 5, cracking into the top 5 here, we have a really cool short story called On Slide-In Road. And I'm not going to say, of course, what the ending is, but at the end, he does give like a small dedication to Flannery O'Connor. So if you've read Flannery O'Connor before, maybe you'll get an idea of where the story is going. But yeah, this story is basically just about a family. I think it's like a wife, husband, and kids, and a grandpa. The grandpa's kind of like the main character in this story. But they're all driving to go to like an aunt's funeral or something like that, someone's funeral, and they kind of get stuck on this road. And then something happens. What that something is, you'll have to read for yourself. But yeah, it was very good. Funny at times, tense at times, but overall just a really good Stephen King short story. And yeah, I really liked it. It comes in at number 5 on the list, On Slide-In Road. And number 4 on the list is The Fifth Step. And I'm pretty sure, yes, this is my favorite short story in the collection. The top 3 are all kind of like novelette and novella length, which I think Stephen King is really good at novellas, so that really shouldn't surprise anyone. But The Fifth Step is definitely my favorite short story that's in this collection. And again, this one is very short, but I think the length kind of works here. It's basically about a guy in New York sitting on a park bench, and this random guy kind of just walks up and starts kind of telling his life story about how he was addicted to alcohol and stuff, and how he kind of got over that. And it takes an interesting turn. Of course, I'm not going to say what that turn is because that's spoilery, but it was very good. And I think it kind of hinders back to kind of old Stephen King short stories. It kind of felt like it could be in like Night Shift or Skeleton Crew. So if you're a big fan of those collections like I am, this story is definitely a winner. I know a lot of people so far have been reading the collection, and a lot of people have loved this short story. No surprise to me. I loved it as well. So yeah, number 4 on the list is The Fifth Step. And now we get into my top 3. And like I said, all of these are kind of either like novelette or novella length, so they're all kind of longer. I will also mention Rattlesnakes was also a novella, and that was very good as well. But number 3 for me is The Answer Man. And this is actually the final story in the collection. It was a really good way to end the collection. I will say, for some reason, Stephen King always finds a way to manage to include, like for his last stories and collections, they're always usually kind of melancholy or depressing in some kind of way, and this is no exception. It's basically about a guy who kind of grows up in like not early America, but like, was it like the 30s and the 40s? He kind of grows up into there, and he is like a lawyer. He wants to be a lawyer for a firm, and he wants to marry, this woman. I won't go into too much detail, but basically there's some issues there, and he kind of runs into this guy who's named the Answer Man. And the Answer Man, you pay him like a lump sum of money called J.G. Whitworth. That's stupid. But you pay him, I think it was like $20 or $25, and you get like 5 minutes with him, and he will answer every question you ask him, and he will answer it truthfully and factfully. And this guy is kind of like, I got some money to spend, and I'm curious. So he does it, and he starts asking him like specific questions, like, what's my mother's maiden name? Like, what's this, blah, blah, blah. And he knows right away. He's like, how the hell does this guy know this? And then he starts to ask like more specific questions about his future. And he kind of uses that knowledge to kind of help him in the future. And then also in the future, he runs into him again, and then he starts asking some questions. And I won't get into that because it's spoilery, but it's very good, kind of very depressing, I will say, towards the end, but very poignant. I really liked this story. It was a really, really good way to end the collection in my mind. So yeah, I'm going to go with The Answer Man for number 3 on the list. And number 3 was the last story in the collection. Number 2 on the list is actually the very first story in the collection, which is Two Little Bastards. And Bastards is spelled B-A-S-T-I-D-S. So it's kind of got that probably a main actually bastards, you know. It's probably not how it's pronounced, but oh well. I really liked this novella, and it was a really fun way to start out the collection. It's basically about these two older guys who, um, early on in their lives, they kind of took a hunting trip in the woods, and then they came back, and everything was very different. And then all of a sudden, they became super famous. One of them became a super famous writer. Of course, Stephen King can't help but have a writer character. And the other one becomes a super famous illustrator and painter, like artist. And they became super famous, and everyone was just very confused as to how they did this and how all of a sudden they became super famous. And this reporter keeps wanting to ask him questions about that night, but the author, the reporter wants to ask questions about that night specifically, like where they went into the woods and what happened, but he never gives an answer until he passes away. And the main kind of narrator of the story gets hold of this writing that he wrote about what happened that night. And the explanation of what happened that night, I'm not going to go into it because it's spoilery, and that's basically the second half of the story, is really good, really gripping. And I can't even really get into specifics about where it goes, but it's a really fun reveal. It's a really good, I will say it's probably Stephen King's, I don't want to give too much away. Stephen King isn't necessarily the best at this type of story. He's written novels that deal with this subject matter, and those are often cited as his worst books. But the way that he does it in this novella works superbly. I loved it. It's a 5-star novella. I would probably maybe put it in his top 10 novellas of all time if I were to redo that list now. It's really good, and yeah, fantastic way to start the collection. So yeah, Two Little Bastards comes in at number 2 on the list. And of course, we're at the number 1 spot, which means there's only one left, and a lot of people have been really digging this novella, and I agree with them. I love it's probably in my top 5, really. If I had to redo, like I said, if I had to redo my top Stephen King novellas, this would have to be in the top 10, maybe even top 5. This is a new instant classic from Stephen King. I loved this one. And that would be Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. And basically what happens is Danny Coughlin has a bad dream, and he's just fixated on it. He's like, because in the dream, he just winds up at this random, like, abandoned gas station, and there's this dog who's chewing on this hand in the ground, and he kind of, waves the dog away and finds, like, oh, there's a body here. And then he wakes up, and he's just like, oh, this is such a weird and specific dream. I remember every detail. And he's trying to think of, like, have I ever been there? Like, what's going on? So one day he drives up there, and pretty much as it plays out in his dream, it plays out in reality. There's a dog there chewing on a hand, and then he finds that there's a body there. And so he calls in to the police anonymously because he wants to report it. And then, that's basically like the first few, the first chunk of the novella. So after that, it takes some pretty interesting turns. I'm not going to go into too much more spoilery talk about that, but that's how it starts out. And it's just, from that point, it's just so good. It takes a lot of turns that I wasn't expecting. And just from the moment it started until the very end, I was hooked. I was hooked like a fish. And like I said, it's an instant classic. I just loved this novella. Easy 5 stars. The best in the collection, and just one of his better novellas ever, in my opinion. So I'm definitely glad he included this in the collection. It's my favorite in the collection, and yeah, and I definitely see a lot of people digging the story as well. So I'm excited to get everyone's take on it. And yeah, that's my favorite in the collection. Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, number 1. All right, so that is my ranking and just my overall review of You Like It Darker. So just to recap, number 12 is Red Screen. Number 11 is Finn. Number 10 is The Dreamers. Number 9 is Willie the Weirdo. Number 8 is The Turbulence Effect. Number 7 is Rattlesnakes. Number 6 is Lori. Number 5 is On Slide In Road. Number 4 is The Fifth Step, which is my favorite short story in the collection. And number 3 is The Answer Man. Number 2 is Two Little Bastards. And number 1, Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, which is just a new favorite of mine, including Two Little Bastards. That's also a new favorite. But really, Danny Coughlin's Dream was like the highlight of this collection for me. So yeah, overall, like I said, not a bad story in here. They're all either pretty good or really good, and some of them, like I said, are just new favorites for me. So overall, I would give this 4.5 stars. I'm hesitating on giving it 5 stars just because some of the bottom ones are more like 3.5, 4-star stories. A lot of these stories are more like 4.5, 5 stars, but overall, extremely good. I could not be more happy that we got a really fun and good Stephen King book, because like I said, the last few, like Holly and Fairy Tale, I have not really been a big fan of. So it was fun to see Stephen King just hone it in and just give us a really good book. But what I want to know is, what did you guys think of the collection? Have you read it yet? If so, are you excited for it? And if you have read it, what are your favorites and least favorites in the collection? How would you rank them? Do you agree or disagree with me? Leave all of those lovely comments down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.